All right, folks, welcome to Investing for Beginners podcast. Today, we're going to do something fun. Andrew is going to talk to me a little bit about payments. So, we thought we would talk about the secret business model behind Visa and MasterCard. Some of you may be very familiar with those names, but you may not know exactly what it is they do and how they do what they do. And this is a little more in my wheelhouse. So, Andrew and I thought we could chat a little bit about that. So, Andrew, ask away.
Yeah, happy to. Maybe for a beginner who doesn't know why should you even care about Visa and MasterCard, like what has their performance been like? Give us the context on how these companies as stocks and businesses have performed. Give us like a little history lesson in a short snapshot.
Yeah, sure. So Visa and MasterCard, they're kind of a duopoly. They do similar things. They have, I guess you could say they have two different focuses. If you want to just generalize, would be that Visa is more American centric, where MasterCard is more international centric. Visa also spends a little more time working on debit cards than MasterCard does, but MasterCard also has a very big place in the whole debit card arena as well. Both of the companies have done fairly well. MasterCard, frankly, has done a little bit better over the last 10 years than Visa has. They've been fairly good performers. They are steady growers. And, every earnings call is a little bit like being a weather person in Arizona. Today, it's going to be sunny and hot. Tomorrow, it's going to be sunny and hot. And the next week, it's going to be sunny and hot. Visa is going to grow revenues at 11 or 12% this quarter, next quarter, the following quarter, and just keeps kind of chugging along. And MasterCard is very similar performance as well. So it's kind of like a basic overview of the companies. History wise, Visa actually was born out of what is now known as Bank of America. It was started in 1958 as a part of an airdrop. That's kind of a famous thing that happened in Fresno. Basically, what Bank of AmeriCard, which is what it was called back then, they, in essence, sent out, I don't remember the exact amount now, but I want to say 100,000, 200,000 free credit cards to all the residents of Fresno, California, and said, oh, hey, have fun. And so people started using them. It was a lot of chaos. They lost a lot of money, but it proved the concept that it could work, that basically credit using a credit card was a way that people could start making payments and merchants could start accepting payments. And that's kind of how Visa kind of has evolved from there. It was actually spun out of Bank of America in 1990 something. And
Ish.
it became, yeah, and became a public company, and MasterCard kind of followed suit from a different business. And they have both become standalone powerhouses and are probably two of the widest moat businesses in the world. If you think of network effects, which we'll touch on here in a little bit, network effects is a classic example of what Visa and MasterCard exhibit in the marketplace. So that's kind of I guess, a rough overview of the businesses, and without giving too much detail.
Love it. Yeah, thanks for keeping that digestible for us.
You're welcome.
So, if you're a beginner, a moat is important because in the stock market and in business, competition is just crazy. And just because you have a good business today doesn't mean you'll have a good one tomorrow. So, there's just countless instances in history of businesses that used to grow a lot and no longer do because a lot of times you can look back and they did not have a moat, that did not have this structural advantage that created this longevity, and that's what we want in these stocks that we buy for the long term is longevity. We will get into kind of like the nitty gritty of the business model because I think that's important too. But like a broad overview of why the moat is so strong, how come you and I couldn't just start our own airdrop and create, the Dave Andrew card like
Well,
tomorrow?
yeah, right. Well, we technically we could, but to get people to use it would be
Right.
a bit of a challenge. The easiest way to explain it is it's super popular. Visa and MasterCard are super popular with customers and with merchants because the merchants all accept Visa and MasterCard cards. And we as users want to go to places that we can use our money to spend. Who has ever been to a place? You go to some place out in the middle of nowhere, for example, and they only accept a Discover card. and you don't have a Discover card and you have no cash, then you can't buy gas at that gas station. And so that makes it really, really hard. And what makes Visa and MasterCard so powerful is not only do you and I have a Visa and MasterCard in our wallets, but the places that we go to spend them also accept those. So it's a two-sided network. And the more people are on the network, the stronger the network becomes. And the more people that are on the network, the more merchants are going to want to accept those cards. And it just becomes this kind of self-reinforcing flywheel of the more people on the network, the more merchants accept it, and kind of round and round it goes. And that's why having these cards in your wallet is so important. And it's really, 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 really hard to replicate. And American Express is another card that's very popular out there, but they have what's called a closed loop network. In other words, you can only use American Express cards where American Express cards are accepted. And you can't use, if they don't accept a Visa card, you can't use the Visa card at that merchant. And you can't transact as a Visa card on an American Express network. And so it's its own separate closed loop network. And it's very powerful, and the cards are, very, very popular. But that is a kind of a separate business. Now, along the way, there have been companies that have tried to do this. Discover, which I mentioned, Diner's Card, which was one of the first ones. Square/Block/XYZ has been attempting to do this all along, but they actually use Visa as their scheme as well. And others along the way have tried and failed. And so this is what makes Visa and MasterCard such a powerful network, is they just, as much as people want to unseat it, it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah, would be hard to. I don't know how many merchants that are in that network, but
Hundreds of thousands.
to convince maybe like even 100 merchants to start accepting my card, and then yeah, to be
Right.
able to match a MasterCard or a Visa, pretty hard. Uh, for me, one of my light bulb moments for kind of understanding Visa's business model was the whole rail, like thinking of it as rails. Can you explain the rails and also how Visa makes money? What exactly is going on when I swipe a Visa card?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how the rails work is, try to think of it as kind of a four-party model, I think is the easiest way to think about it. So you have the cardholder, which is us. You have an issuer who gives you the card, which is most cases is your bank. So if you bank with JP Morgan or Bank of America, or in my case, Ally, when I go to Ally and get a card from Ally Bank, a debit card, for example, they give me a card that I can use to make payments. We also have the merchant. So that's the person you're going to buy from. So if you go to a grocery store and want to buy some food, that is the merchant. And then you have the acquirer processor, and those are the people that actually process the payment. But what it can get confusing, and this is where people will sometimes get confused, is acquirer or processor can also be the issuer of your bank. So JP Morgan has JP Morgan Chase. They have a processor as part of the bank. So not only will they give you the card or the credit card, they also will make the processing payment. But the easiest way to think about it is Visa and MasterCard is the network that allows all of this to happen. So what happens is, you as the cardholder go to make a purchase. You make the purchase, the money goes over the rail from the merchant through Visa and MasterCard as the air quote toll road that authorizes the payment, makes sure that the credentials are accurate, and then it goes to the bank. The bank says, okay, yes, Andrew has the money to buy this Coke Zero, and then the money gets routed back to the merchant, and they accept the money into their account. And Visa enables all of that to happen. Now, the amazing thing about all this is two things. Number one is this is where a lot of people get confused about Visa or MasterCard. So I'll just kind of put this out there right now. They are not a card. They are only the processing network that allows all this to happen. When you have a Visa or a MasterCard, they don't transact any of the money. They just allow the money to move over the rails or the electronic system from point A to point B and back. And so what happens is, when you process your card, all that happens in microns of a second, and we all get irritated when it takes more than 2 seconds for this to happen, but it happens pretty much instantaneously, and it all happens behind the scenes, and that is what Visa and MasterCard do. Now, where Visa and MasterCard make their money is they make pennies on each transaction. So the more dollars that transact over the network, they make a very, very small amount of that. So, for example, if you transact $100, Visa and MasterCard will take maybe 2 to 3 cents of that they will keep. The vast majority of money is actually goes to the merchant bank, because they're the ones actually accepting the vast majority of the risk for this transaction. Visa and MasterCard have little to no risk involved in this, because they're not actually holding the money. The bank is, or the merchant is. And so those are the people, and the merchant acquirer also gets a small cut of this. But out of $100 transaction, maybe $2.50 to $3 may come out off the top of that the merchant gets the $97, and the rest of it gets split up between the other parts of the players of the network. But Visa and MasterCard only get a very, very small portion of that. But because they're transacting, trillions of transactions a year, it adds up to 35 billion in revenue in a year. So it adds up quick.
Yeah, amazing how big the Visa MasterCard are as businesses.
Yeah, massive.
So just to recap, then we use my favorite, the ice cream shop. Ice cream shop with a Bank of America account. Dave comes in with his Ally Bank account, or Ally Bank, your Visa card from your Ally Bank account. Can you walk through that example one more time? We have the ice cream owner with a Bank of America account, and then you come in with your Ally Visa card.
Yeah. So I walk in with my Ally Visa card, and I want to buy an ice cream cone from the ice cream shop. And let's say it's, $5. It's premium ice cream. So you pay $5 for the ice cream. The merchant is charging us, Dave, $5. The $5 is going to come out of our bank account at some point in the network. Along the way, it's going to go through what's called a merchant acquirer or a processor. And if that is the card bank, that's Ally Bank, who could be processing the payment, then they're going to take, let's say, maybe just for ease, $1. They will take out of the transaction. Then the money will go to Visa and MasterCard, who are going to authorize the payment. They're going to route it. They're going to clear it, and they're going to make sure that everything is copacetic on a security level, so a fraud level. Then it goes to Ally Bank, and then Ally Bank will say, yes, Andrew has $5 to buy this premium ice cream. Then the money goes back to Visa and MasterCard, and then it gets routed back to the merchant. As it's getting routed back to the merchant, then Visa and MasterCard will take their pennies, let's say 5 cents, off of the transaction. So now when we pay for the ice cream, Andrew, as the purchaser of the ice cream, is paying $5. The ice cream shop is going to receive $5 less $1 less 5 cents. So in their bank statement, they will see a $3.95 charge that they will receive as payment for the $5 of ice cream. Now that's a lot bigger markup than really happens, but I was just trying to use that as ease of convenience for explaining how all that works. So each part of the process along the way will take a little bit of a chip of it, and that's how these people will all make their money along the way.
There's got to be different revenue streams for Visa, right? Not just this one that we're talking about.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So Visa basically breaks down, Visa and MasterCard have similar breakdowns, but I'm going to focus on Visa. So Visa has 4 segments that they classify for the revenues. They have service revenues, they have data processing, they have international transactions or cross-border, and then they have what they call value-added services. So service revenues is the money that they make on exactly how this whole transaction we just talked about. So the ice cream shop example that we used, the 5 cents that Visa would get for that transaction, that would fall under the service revenues. So this is basis points is on purchase volume. So they get very small amount of money for all the money that's transacted on the Visa network, not just the individual, but it's like a batch. So, $100 million gets transacted yesterday. And so
Mm.
Visa would make a small proportion of that. So that's one surface level of their revenue. The next level is data processing. So this is where Visa will actually transact the payment. So they will run it through their transaction processor, and they will earn per transaction fees on the authorization, clearing, and the settling of the payments. So one thing I forgot to mention, when we go through the ice cream example, the $5 that we are paying for that ice cream, the $3.95 that the ice cream shop receives, in a lot of cases they won't actually receive it. We're on Thursday now. They wouldn't receive it until Friday or Saturday at the earliest. So there's usually a lag time between the time that the transaction is processed and the money actually comes out of the merchant bank or the acquirer bank and goes to the merchant. And so depending on the scheme and who's processing and how much transaction they have, it could be a day or two, or it could be the next day. Some processors will charge you a little bit more to get them faster. But all that to say, this is also a part of Visa's revenue model. Is they get a percentage on the purchase volume. They also get a percentage on transaction fees. So all the money that goes into transacting. The third level is what's called the international transactions or cross-border. So this is the highest margin one, and this is the one that it's tied to travel. It's also tied to e-commerce. So travel is easy to think about. If Andrew and I take a trip to Italy, for example, like who wouldn't want to go to Italy? If we go to Italy and we buy a bottle of wine while we're in Italy using our Ally Visa card, then we will be charged a higher fee. We won't. The bank will be charged, or the processor will be charged. The merchant will have a higher fee that they will see because it's a cross-border transaction. Visa will get a higher percentage of that transaction. So instead of maybe pennies on the dollar, maybe they get 10 cents on the dollar. So they get a higher margin for that transaction, and they make more money on these transactions. The same rule applies for e-commerce. So if I was to go online and buy a Real Madrid jersey for my daughter from Spain, there would be an e-commerce or a cross-border fee that would be charged, and that's a higher fee, and that again gives Visa a higher percentage or a higher margin. And then the last one is what's called value-added services. And this includes things like tokenization, fraud and identity, dispute, consulting, risk, open banking, remittances. It's a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different stuff that Visa adds as a way to encourage more usage of their rails. And so they offer different add-ons that people can pay for to get a higher level of fraud or identity, for example, or get higher levels of risk to make sure their transactions go through.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Is there a segment of those? You mentioned the four. Is there one that makes you most excited? One that has been growing better?
The cross border is the one that probably gets the most notice because it's the highest margin, and a lot of people get really excited about that idea. Visa and MasterCard have both talked a lot about that through the years, about really trying to encourage that. But I think the thing that I get the most excited about is actually the value-added services, and this is the segment that's actually growing the fastest for Visa. If I look at Fiscal's financials and you look at those four segments over the last 10 years, the value-added services has grown around 14.2% for the company, whereas services and data processing have grown at 10.3 and 13.1%, and cross-border has grown at 12.6%. So the value-added services is the one that's actually growing the fastest, and it's actually the one that Visa has been talking about the most. And a lot of it is because they see the writing on the wall. They see that there is still a lot of room to grow for the other two parts of the business, but the value-added services and the cross-border probably have the biggest opportunities for the company. And I'll touch on the international for just a second. The cross-border, one of the reasons why the company thinks cross-border still has a really long ways to grow is the usage of cash globally is still really high. I was kind of doing some research looking into this, and places like Latin America, other parts of the world, you're seeing anywhere from 50% or more higher usage of cash still in this day and age. And MasterCard released something, I think, a day or two ago, talking about the usage globally of cash is still over 50% globally. And so that tells me that there's still a really long runway to go before we not eliminate cash. I don't think we'll ever eliminate it, but certainly reduce the importance of it. Places like Asia Pacific, for example, they actually have a much lower usage of cash than other parts of the world. And that makes them maybe less attractive to a Visa and MasterCard in this particular realm, just because there's not as much growth opportunity there. But when you think about the value added services, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so one of the aspects of the value added services is something like remittances. Brett and I talked about on our show a while ago, we talked about Wise and Remitly. And those are two companies that are very, very prominent in the whole remittance area. Well, Visa Direct is another player in that field. And if you're not familiar with Visa Direct, you don't feel bad. It's not a global name yet, but it's very similar to like here in the United States, something like Zelle. It's very similar to Zelle, where it's a push service where you have to go into your account and send money to people as opposed to people requesting money from you. And so that's what's happening with a lot of these remittance companies. Visa Direct is working to try to compete with those people. And to me, that is one of the things that I think is a really huge opportunity, not only for Visa and other remittance companies, but there's a really big push right now to make cross-border money or sending money to each other a lot easier than it has been. And if you've ever used Zelle, you understand how clunky it can be. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for that. So value added services to me is probably the thing I'm most excited about with when it comes to Visa. Not only for it goes to one of the global things that Visa really wants to push, and I'll get off my soapbox here in just a second. The They really want to be a player in all kinds of moving money, not just transacting money from merchant to consumer and back. So those are called C2B, so customer to business. They also want to be B2B, and they also want to be account to account. So they're working hard to try to generate more payment flows, is I guess the best way of putting it, and trying to branch out so they have other opportunities for revenue.
Yeah, B2B just seems, I don't know. I mean, I have a limited perspective on it, but just from what I've seen in my limited perspective, it's not impressive. C
Mm-mm.
to B really has, it's a very efficient thing, and B2B is a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. The thing that Visa is trying to do and other businesses are trying to do is this kind of idea of helping businesses, helping them with cash flow. So one of the biggest struggles, I'll use a restaurant, for example, because I'm familiar with that and it's easy to imagine. When you're a restaurant, you have to pay for your food before you receive your just like any business, right? You have to pay for your product before you sell it. And so sometimes the way you get your cash flow from the restaurant, you do the vast majority of your business on the weekends, but you also do your ordering earlier in the week. So you spend a big portion of your money on, let's say, Wednesday, but you don't actually receive the vast majority of your revenues until Sunday or Monday. And when you have that lag that we were talking about with processing that we were discussing earlier, if you don't get your money until Tuesday, now you got to turn around and pay for food on Wednesday again for the next Friday and Saturday. And so what Visa and other companies are trying to do is they're trying to, you can look at it two ways. They're either trying to give you money up front based on what you expect to get from your cash flows, or they're giving you short-term, very short-term loans, 1 or 2 day loans to help you cover the bills. And then when you get your cash, you pay that off, and it just becomes this kind of revolving cycle. And that's one of the things that Visa is trying to do, is work with companies to basically take out a loan against their payables, expecting that they'll do $15,000 in revenue on Saturday, and so they can afford to give people a loan, short-term loan, in return for that payment when they get it in.
Yeah, it sounds so obvious. It's amazing that that's such a
Mhm.
huge green field for them.
Right.
It's like, why wasn't that done a long time ago?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned MasterCard, and we probably should have mentioned them before, but hey, we love Visa. What can we say?
Right.
Is MasterCard's revenue streams similar to Visa's business model pretty much the same, or is it different?
MasterCard is very, very similar to Visa. So if you look at their overall revenue growth, it's chugging along around 10 or 11%, just like Visa's is. And if you look at their domestic assessments, as they call it, which is their normal transactions, it's 10.1%. Their cross-border international stuff is 11.2, so a little bit less than Visa, but in the ballpark. The transaction processing is a little higher than Visa's was, and they're around 15%. And the added services is growing at 20%, so faster than Visa and MasterCards, or I'm sorry, Visas. So they're roughly in the same ballpark, but it looks like they're growing faster in transaction processing and added services. But it is very similar.
So now, can we compare to some of the other competitors? The Visa and MasterCard make money very similar ways. I
Mhm.
know American Express and Discover don't. Can we cover the differences there and how you think about the competitive dynamics, Visa, MasterCard versus Amex, Discover, and whoever else?
Right. American Express to me is kind of a standalone beast of its own, mostly because they are actually a bank. And that's one of the things that differentiates them from the get go between Visa and MasterCard. Visa and MasterCard are simply little schemes or icons that you see on your cards that offer these abilities to make transactions. Whereas American Express offers that same idea. They allow you to make transactions on their network with people that accept their cards as well as you as a card holder. You don't have a choice of, well, you kind of have a choice, but most people American Express card is from the American Express bank. And so American Express makes money in two different ways. So the first way that they make it is on the transactions on their network, just like a processor would, whether it's JP Morgan Chase, whether it's Fiserv, Adyen. So they're making their money that way. The second way they're making money is on the bank part of it. So they make money from the loans that they give either on personal loans, which is a smaller part of their business, or the balances that revolve on their credit cards. They make interest on those loans. The interest that we pay on the balance is part of the money that American Express makes. And so that is a big difference between their business model and Visa and MasterCards. I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't know Discover's as well. I believe it's very similar that they have their own network and it is a bank. Now they're merging with Capital One and that hasn't happened yet. So that is going to change. And that I think is going to be something that's going to be interesting to see how Capital One handles the Discover network and the Discover cards and how they use their ability to grow the business because Capital One is a very, very big name in the credit card industry, whereas Discover is not as big a name. But they'll have the ability to do a lot of the same things that American Express is going to do and Visa and MasterCard. So I'm not quite sure how that's all going to play out yet, but I will be keeping an eye on that. And we could be talking about that company at sometime in the near future as well.
Yeah, totally. Do you like the bank model better or the Visa MasterCard model better? Are there pros and cons to both either?
Oh, that's a little bit like trying to compare which brother do you like better. They're different in that one is super capital light. Like Visa MasterCard is very capital light and it's also very risk off. Like there's not a lot of risk involved in the transactions that they do. So their business itself doesn't carry a lot of risk. Whereas American Express, because the nature of giving out loans to people, they carry a higher level of risk because they're financially responsible for the money that they lend out. And so that automatically gives them a higher level of risk. But the flip side of that is that American Express has a very, very strong moat, a hugely strong brand, very recognizable brand, a lot of buying power, a lot of brand power. and people loved their American Express cards, and they live for the rewards that they get. A good example, my sister just traveled to Spain, and they used their American Express card to purchase the tickets to go to Spain. Because they use their American Express card, they get a lot of reward points that they were able to use to make the plane tickets cheaper. So they saved money on the plane tickets with that part of it. And then when they're at the airports, they were able to go to the Delta lounges because they're Delta customers and they're American Express customers. And so they get this access to these great lounges, free food, free beverages, and it just makes the journey for them that much easier. Now, even though they pay $700 a year for the annual fee, to them it's a no-brainer. And that's the power of a company like American Express, is that people will willingly fork over a lot of money for those rewards, and they think it's hugely valuable to them, and they wouldn't even consider giving that up. They would cancel another card before they'd cancel their American Express card. So to me, they're two different business models, and they would be two different types of investments, even though they're in similar industries.
So, what are some of the risks to Visa and MasterCard that investors should be aware of?
Yeah. So as much as I'm bullish on all three of these companies that we talked about today, there's always risk, right? There's just no such thing as a free lunch, as like Andrew likes to say. I would
On Wall Street.
probably, yeah, on Wall Street. maybe at home there's a free lunch, but not on Wall Street. I guess I would probably say there's maybe two main risks and maybe a minor one. The biggest one that gets probably the most attention, rightfully so, is regulation / litigation. The governments are always coming at Visa and MasterCard about how they do what they do, and they're always looking for ways to lower the fees. Anytime the government sees a monopoly, which you could argue Visa and MasterCard, they may not be technically a monopoly, but they're pretty much a monopoly. And governments don't like that because understandably they feel like it stifles competition and it can cause prices to get out of whack. And so the biggest probably concern is that, and you see this going on in Europe, you see it going on in Australia, you see it in different places in the world, here even in the United States, where they put different caps on how much Visa and MasterCard can charge for certain things. That is probably going to be one of the biggest ongoing, continuing risks, is how governments will handle Visa and MasterCard and how much limit they try to put on those companies of what they can charge and how they do their business. And so far, both companies have been able to pretty well navigate everything. And that's why I think they've been putting a big emphasis on the added services, because that could help offset some of the litigation that's going on. The second big risk is real-time account to account. So I mentioned the Visa Direct and Zelle, but a bigger, not necessarily disruption, but a cap on growth would be the account to account that are happening in big unbanked populations like India and Brazil. So UPI in India and PIX in Brazil. These are two rails that they offer there in those countries that are done by the governments that basically avoid Visa and MasterCard. So you can make payments to businesses can make payments to businesses, and people can transfer money account to account over those rails without including Visa and MasterCard. And that, if that grows, or other governments like the United States would ever adopt that and becomes a regular thing, that could definitely put a big dent in Visa and MasterCard in the businesses. And so that's probably a really big risk to consider and keep an eye on as this goes forward. And then the last one, which is maybe a smaller risk, but it's certainly something to keep in mind, is platform power. As wallets become bigger and bigger part of how we make payments. And when I'm talking about wallets, I'm talking about our iPhone. When we go to the store and make a payment on our iPhone, that's a wallet. And we don't necessarily always have to use a Visa or MasterCard. Now, right now, most of the wallets are governed by Visa and MasterCard, but there are some out there that will not be. And especially with these account-to-account type payments with UPI, PIX, Visa Direct, and so on, you could probably work around those, and that could be a limiter to their growth in the future as well. So those are the three that I think about the most.
How do you rank them and think about versus not?
I think about the real time payments a lot. The regulation, I think about less so. I would probably say, if I had to put odds on them, I'd say I think about real time payments about 50% of the time, regulation maybe 40% of the time, and platform power maybe 10% of the time. So, it's for me, the first two are kind of like, 1A and 1B, and then, two for the last one.
Yeah, I guess the benefit, if you want to call it a benefit, is whenever there's regulation risk, it's usually gets attention.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
something
it
to
does.
monitor easily. Yeah.
Right. It's not one of those things that just, all of a sudden happens. There's usually lots of discussion about it coming, and then lots of discussion about once it's passed, and then even more discussion about it being implemented. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's lots of warning that it's coming.
Yeah. And it's funny when you start talking about the Durbin and all that stuff you've written about, like how deep that rabbit hole goes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just so deep. And when I've written about it, I've only just kind of scratched at the surface of it. And if you try to read the bill, it's really long and really confusing. But there is so much that still hasn't even been implemented by that, and it was passed, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. So
Yeah.
there's still a lot to be worked through with those.
Nice. Real quick on the real time payments, what would happen that would make you have alarm bells sound in that, or is that too hard to quantify?
The thing that would make it, I guess, an alarm bell would be if it got accepted here in such a way that it enabled those normal payments that are done over Visa and MasterCard to now be done on FedNow or
Mm,
some sort of real-time payment here in the United States. If it got
yeah.
accepted, and when I say accepted, I mean by the general population, not like technologically we could do it, but whether or
Right.
not you and I start using it. If I see my grandma start using a real-time payment to buy a coffee, then I know Visa and MasterCard are in trouble.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's a great way to look at a lot of businesses is
Mm.
take the take the average consumer or average customer and not what somebody on social media or CNBC thinks about.
Right. Yeah. The early adopters, right?
Right. Where do you see the future now? We mentioned on a previous episode you're bullish on Visa still.
Mhm.
What do you see for the industry? Just what are your thoughts around that?
And what I'm most excited about is the industry just in general, and Visa and MasterCard are certainly playing a part in this, is that they all seem to have the focus and the intent to make paying for things as easy as they possibly can. And we aren't there yet. And I think we got a long, long ways to go before we get there. As much as I love using my wallet on my iPhone, and I think that's a really easy way to make payments, it's still not seamless. There's perfect examples. A lot of websites that you go to don't accept something like Apple Pay. And so having the ability to use your wallet online is still, there's a huge opportunity for that. And so
Mhm.
I think, and as more people become banked, there's still, even in the United States, there's still a good portion of people that are unbanked that don't use a bank on a day-to-day basis. And I think until we get to that point here in the US and globally, and they make payments even more and more frictionless, I think there's still a long, long ways to go. And there's so many different ways that they can use this to make our society better, because I think the more income equality we have, I think the better our society will be. And the more payments can enable that to happen, I think the better it's going to be. One of the things that I read about today, which kind of blew my mind, it just never even considered it, but there are some companies that are working on the ability to give you, so you get paid every day. So if you work at Dairy Queen, most Dairy Queen workers have to wait every 2 weeks or a month to get paid. But what would happen if you got paid every day? How much would that
Mm.
help your cash flow? How much would that help managing your money? Like all those things, how different would that be? And So I still think there's a long, long runway to go with all of this, and I think Visa and Mastercard are going to be at the forefront of all of it.
Love it. If you go back in history, the way that railroads really enabled so much in this country, this is another rails that could do a lot of cool things. I appreciate the time and the expertise. This is a ton of research that you've put into this and continue to put into it. So we really appreciate it. If people want to get more of your research on payments, how can they do so?
They're going to have to check out Value Spotlight.
Yeah, that's the place to go. Monthly stock pick, research in there about payments, semiconductors, and energy. And it's all current, top of mind, what Dave's thinking about, what he's finding. einvestingforbeginners.com/spotlight would be the place to access that.
All right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and sign us off. You guys go out there and invest with a margin of safety. Emphasis on the safety. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you all next week.